Hey there, it's John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to part 6 of our 6-part Amonkhet full set review. Today we're looking at all of the multicolor and colorless cards, basically wrapping up the set. Now, if you've been watching the channel this week, you know we've hit all the colors in the color pie in various videos. There is a playlist if you need to catch up, but today we're focusing on basically the rest of the set. Quickly before we get started though, if you check out the description below, you'll find a couple ways to help support the channel. It's always appreciated. One of which is our Patreon page. We're actually really close to our next Patreon goal, so check that out. And also, you can find out how to support us through our Amazon affiliate storefront. If you make any purchases through those links to any Amazon seller, a small percentage will come back to help support the channel. Really goes a long way, so thank you to everyone who participates in both of those ways to support us and help us keep making these videos. Having said that, we got a lot of cards to look at, so I want to go kind of quick and start off with Failure to Comply. This is actually a pretty good tempo play in Limited. It's something that, it's rare, you're not going to see a lot of these, but I'm happy to run one of in my deck, and that's just good enough. I think even if I'm only in blue, the tempo of returning a spell to its owner's hand for 2 seems fine to me. I mean, there's going to be better things some of the time, but if I have white to back it up, this card becomes a lot better. It becomes kind of a sorcery/instant version of Reflector Mage. Reflector Mage, I think, was better than this card, but of course, that's not an option right now in either Standard or Limited. So, you have this. I do think it's playable as a one-of. It potentially could see some Standard play, too, in a control deck, because, again, without Reflector Mage around, this is still a good ability, and as far as its cost goes, it's very economical. Aven Wind Guide. Well, this is obviously better for you if you have some tokens. So, is it playable without the tokens in Limited? Sure it is. I mean, it's a forecasting cost 2/3 Flying Vigilance. It is 2 different colors to cast, but still, I think there's enough value here that even if you had no token generation, it could still be a card you play just as a body. It also has Embalm, so it's tricky to get rid of. It could come back. That's kind of nice. Now, if you have tokens or some token generation, the value of this card for you in a draft certainly goes up a lot higher. I don't know if I would necessarily first pick this and then try to pick up tokens and Embalm, but if I'm in pack 3 and I've already picked up a lot of that stuff, this becomes a much higher pick for me for sure. I don't know if this card will see Standard play. I mean, it feels a tad expensive for what it is at 4, but I kind of wonder, is it worth splashing blue into like an Orzhov zombie build to slide something like this in for some extra value? I'd want to test it. That feels like maybe it would be a little too slow, but I'd at least want to try it. Tibet Vizier of Noctimun. This is very similar to the previous card. I mean, stats-wise, it's kind of on par, a 2/2 for 2. It even has Embalm. Now, it is asking 2 different colors, so keep in mind, a lot of times that's a turn 3 play, not a turn 2 play in Limited. But that's fine. If you need a body, it's there for you. However, this card becomes a lot better if you have tokens for it to interact with, obviously. So if you're in Azorius colors, there's a good chance you do have some token generation through either their usual means or Embalm cards. Even if you're in Orzhov and you pick this up a little bit later and feel like you can splash the blue for it, could be good for you there. So there's a lot of places you can play this in Limited. This is another one of those cards that in first pack, I might not pick it up early, but in pack 2 or pack 3, the stock could go up if I have a lot of creature token generation and or Embalm creatures in my deck. As far as other formats go, this has a chance to see Standard play. I mean, it's doing a lot for 2 mana, and it wasn't that long ago that we saw Selesnya tokens doing really well. A card like this might be able to revive a archetype like that in the meta. I guess time will tell on that one. Commander, this could be a fun commander. I like these cheap 2-drop commanders sometimes. So if you have a commander deck that's a token or swarm deck or something like that, and you want a commander that you can potentially play early and often, this could be a good choice for you to try out. Start to finish. This is fine removal for you in Limited if you're in these 2 colors. If you're just in white, it's creature generation for you, which could be good too for 3. I actually like this a lot. It's also an instant for the white side anyway, so sometimes you can use that as a combat trick, which comes in handy. So I don't mind running one of these in a deck. If I am in black and white, I would even be happy to run a couple of these in a deck, because that Bone Splinter style removal spell on the black side is actually pretty decent too, especially if you have some tokens to throw into that. Wayward Servant. This is one of my favorite cards, I think, in the set. I really like what this does. 2/2 for 2, so decent stats. It's a zombie, sometimes that's going to matter, but most importantly, when other zombies enter the battlefield, you get to drain life. I like this a lot for the potential Standard zombie aristocrat deck. And I mentioned this in other videos, but I feel like the pieces are there for maybe an Orzhov or Esper zombie tribal deck that's using sacrifice to their benefit. We've seen cards that give you benefits when zombies leave play. Well, here's a card that now gives you something when they enter the battlefield. In Limited, this is a fine card to pick up too, as long as you have some zombies around you or some embalm strategies going on. Again, you're going to find benefit from a lot of cards that work alongside it in these colors. Rags to Riches. This card is okay for me as a sideboard option, especially the rag side. And I get what it's trying to do. It's trying to let you wipe out your opponent's small creatures and then use the riches to get something good from them. But it's not always going to work out. A couple issues with it. Even if you are in these colors, it's a very color intensive. 2 black on the black side, 2 blue on the blue side. The -2/-2 effect costing 4 means you're probably not going to be able to play the 7 casting cost riches side the same turn. So your opponent's going to know it's there. They're going to play around it. That can be an issue for you a lot of the time. And obviously it doesn't work in all builds. Like if you're on the small creature plan, then this could hurt you potentially more than your opponent. So I just leave this in my sideboard, and if my opponent's on the small creature plan, I'd board it in. The second part is just kind of gravy on top. Maybe it's just tempoing my opponent, making them think twice about what they play, but that's good enough if I got the value out of the rag side. I'm not even worried about the riches side at that point. Or even if I'm on a small creature plan, but my opponent is too, and maybe I lost game 1 and I need a panic button, I could bring it in for that, and then it becomes kind of a equalizer if I need it. Shadowstorm Vizier. This is fine in Limited too. 1/3 flyer for 2. I like that. It's a nice blocker against small flyers, and it does what Damir's trying to do in the set, and that's get benefit from cycling and or discarding. And this is going to potentially sometimes be able to attack in, maybe as a 2/4 or even a 3/4 under the right circumstances. Reduce to Rubble. The first side, Reduce, is a fine Limited counterspell. You'll be happy to play this if this is what you have. The Rubble side, if you are in red, is a nice tempo play too, keeping an opponent off their land or maybe off a color for a return. Lets you keep putting the pressure on, or buys you time to draw into some of your threats or counter magic. I like running one of these potentially in a Limited build. Enigma Drake. This card I think is actually pretty strong. I always like Spellheart Chimera, but the problem with that card was the 3 toughness, especially when it comes to like Modern or something like that. It was just too easy to burn out. This card takes away the trample, but gives you an extra point of toughness, and I actually like that quite a bit. That makes this card much more playable, I think, ultimately. As far as Limited goes, it's not going to be the best card necessarily in your deck, but I think it can do some work. Even if you don't have a lot of instants and sorceries in your deck, you play this for a 0/4, it's a nice blocker in the air, and then eventually as the game goes on, it becomes a 1/4 and a 2/4. You start to think, wow, you know what, I got some decent value out of this for simply 3 mana. As far as Standard goes, it could see some Standard play. I think it will during its lifespan in the meta. I don't know if it will be immediately. Control decks might like something like this, like is it spell style decks, but the only issue is they have some other good finishers right now, like the Sphinx we looked at the other day, so that could elbow this out a little bit. Modern, maybe the Spells deck and Izzet could play this. I always felt like they would play Spellheart Chimera if it wasn't a 3 toughness. So here's an opportunity, I guess, to test that and see if it works out. Cut to Ribbons. This is fine and Limited to run a card like this, I think, because yes, it's not an instant and it can't hit players, but it's only 2 mana. It's going to deal with most of the trouble that you could run into in Limited when it comes to creatures. Now, Ribbons is actually a great card for those Rakdos aggro decks. When you do all your damage up front, your opponent starts putting those blockers out in the mid-game, they stabilize, and you kind of run out of gas. Well, this is a great way to get those last few points of damage across and maybe even close out a game. So this is perfect for the aggressive build. I do think it actually could see a little bit of Standard play too if the aggressive deck ends up in Rakdos colors, and a card like this could potentially pull it in that direction. It's definitely something to watch. Merciless Javelineer. This is a nice value card. There's a lot going on here. First off, it's a 4/2 for 4. It's a Minotaur. Sometimes that will matter, as we'll see in a moment. You can pay 2 to discard a card, so it's a discard outlet that could come in really handy at certain times in this format. Also, you get to throw a -1/-1 counter on a creature. That's pretty good too. There's times where that actually will matter with your creatures, where you might even want to counter on one of yours. But most of the time, you'll probably be throwing it on your opponent's stuff, and then that creature can't block that turn, so it's great for aggressive builds. It's just doing a whole lot of different things, so it just makes me feel like it'll be a good pickup for 4 mana, especially for those stats 4/2, if you can get across with a little bit of damage, or at the very least, at times it could trade up. Neheb the Worthy. Well, here's your Minotaur Lord, and this plays well with the cards in the Rakdos colors that are trying to get you close to Hellbent, the 1 or fewer card cards, and this is actually one of them. It gives Minotaurs first strike, and also if you have 1 or fewer cards, they get +2/+0. So there are a fair amount of Minotaurs in the set. You might be able to find some value there in a draft, especially if you pick this up early. Maybe you can start trying to grab all the Minotaurs you see and find value that way. If this does get in for some damage on a player, everybody discards a card. Again, that can be an advantage for you, especially in these colors, and it could be an advantage for your opponents too, so you do have to be a little bit careful with this, but it could also be hand disruption. The stats in general aren't super exciting on the card though. A 2/2 for Striker for 3 is probably not getting by for damage a whole lot. You're probably running this for its other abilities more than anything. As far as standard goes, I feel like at least right now this is a little too clunky for standard, especially being legendary. This might be better if you could play multiples of it. But at this time, having 1 out at a time, I don't know if that's going to be quite good enough. There could be some aggressive decks that might want to run one of these or something like that. But there are so many good aggressive options out there. I don't know if it will make the cut, quite honestly. It could just kind of squeak by, but there are just a lot of good cards out there right now when it comes to that particular archetype. As far as limited goes, though, I think it's a good card. I'd pick it up early and try to go the Minotaur route sometimes. I think that could actually be a fun draft. And Commander, it's legendary. You wanted to build a Minotaur deck, you could try. There's actually a fair amount of Minotaurs in this set, as well as a fair amount in older days of Magic, and some cards that even complement them when you go back to like the old Homelands days and stuff like that. You could put something kind of funny together, and you might have to use some changelings to round it out, but it could be fun. Destined to Lead. This is another card that I feel like is a good black combat trick. It also allows you to protect a creature from removal. So running a 1 of these in a black deck is fine. The lead side, again, is just extra bonus on top if you happen to be in green. What I like about this particular card is lead is really about, if I'm going wide with a lot of tokens and stuff, just tying up my opponent's blockers and just attacking in with everything else and kind of getting that game-winning strike. That's what this card can do for you. I mean, sure, you can do some shenanigans with, like, the Green God and Death Touch and taking out a bunch of creatures if you want to, too, if you're lucky enough to get the Green God or some other Death Touch creatures. But for the most part, where this is really going to shine is just tying up your opponent's blockers and just getting in there for that alpha strike. Decimator Beetle. First off, I want to point out something in the rules text here. When this attacks, remove a -1/-1 counter from target creature you control and put a -1/-1 counter on up to 1 target creature defending player controls. Now, you do not have to have a -1/-1 counter on one of your creatures to put the -1/-1 counter on your opponent's creature. So I do want to make sure everyone realizes that, because that isn't super intuitive. Having said that, and that out of the way, this is a good card. A 4/5 for 5. It gets a -1/-1 counter put on something you control. So sometimes this is maybe this particular card, and it could become a 3/4, but when it attacks, you can remove that counter, so that's actually not bad at all. And you start putting counters on your opponent's stuff, and start kind of whittling them down. Typically, I wouldn't be super excited about a 4/5 for 5 with no evasion, but the fact that I can start throwing some -1/-1 counters around the board makes me start feeling a lot better about it. I might even first pick this, and then try to pick up a lot of those Golgari -1/-1 counter cards that play well with this, and kind of see where it goes from there. It's uncommon. You might even be able to get a second one. That would be crazy too. So I think this is a strong limited card. Hepatra, Vizier of Poisons. I like her for her second ability. I don't think I'm going to be able to attack in with her all that much, being a 2/2 for 2, especially 2 different colors. But the fact that whenever I can throw a -1/-1 counter on a creature, then I get a 1/1 snake with Death Touch, that's actually pretty awesome. So it is 1 or more counters, so keep that in mind. If you're playing something that says put 3 -1/-1 counters, you only get 1 snake. But still, I think that could add up over time if you have a lot of these Golgari cards that are in the business of throwing -1/-1 counters around. This is a card that I would first pick and then try to build that archetype. Or if you're real lucky, you've already gotten into that archetype and you happen to get this maybe in pack 2 or 3. There's a potential someone could pass this to you in a third pack because everyone's archetypes are already established, and this is a very particular archetype. So you could get lucky in a draft with a situation like that. So definitely a card to watch for sure. As far as commander goes, it's a cheap commander. You can play it early, you can play it often. There's already a lot of decks out there that focus on snake tokens and death touch and stuff like that. This will fit perfectly into those type of builds. Heaven to Earth. If I'm in green and I need an answer for flying, here's my answer for flying. I might be sideboarding it in more than anything, but it's there if I need it. If I happen to be in Gruul colors and I also want a panic button to back it up after I play the Heaven side, well, then I got one that can clear the ground if I need it. Again, I think of the Earth as more of just upside to the Heaven part of the card, but the Heaven part is very playable under certain circumstances out of the sideboard and limited. Kenra Charioteer. This feels like it wants to crew a vehicle, doesn't it? But it's a 3/3 for 3 with trample, giving other creatures trample. Perfect Gruul card for limited. In fact, you could pick this up, maybe even first pick, and then try to get the bigger creatures. There's so many of these large creatures that don't have evasion in green that you take some of the red aggressive small creatures to kind of round out your curve. You could have something pretty nice on your hands there in limited. Samut, Voice of Dissent. I kind of said this when the card was previewed, but I feel like we're looking at a future Planeswalker here. This is a mythic, and this card kind of does it all. It's legendary, which in some ways is a drawback when it comes to standard, because I would like to play these in multiples, but you can't have more than one attacking in, unfortunately, right now at the same time. But it might not be a drawback in Commander, for example, if you want this to be your Commander. Having said all that, this card's phenomenal. I mean, first off, it has Flash, so you can surprise your opponent and just flash in a double strike 3/4. That's awesome. If you want to get aggressive, which most of the time I think this card will do, it comes in, double strike, vigilance, haste, and other creatures you control with haste too. That's awesome. And you know what? If I have some white mana to throw at this, I can tap this to untap other creatures. So I can either put something up to protect myself, I can mitigate an exert cost. This card just does it all. I mean, this is awesome. I think this will definitely see standard play just because the raw power level is here. And it could see play in a number of different type of archetypes, actually. It could simply be an aggro card in a deck that's splashing some green. It could be in a more Gruul-style stoppy deck. Over time, I think this thing will show up in the format again and again, and sometimes in different roles. Limited, first pickable. I mean, very, very easy card to pick up and just run with. Even on its own, without much synergy with other stuff, it's great, but it even still has synergy with other things on top of that. Fantastic card. Onward to Victory. Sometimes you can pick up one of these. It's a nice combat trick if you're in red. If you happen to have white too, sometimes it's just an additional 1-2 punch to help you close out a game in an aggressive build. I'm happy running a 1-of. And I like these as combat tricks. Sometimes it's defensively played. Sometimes it'll be offensively played. There will be times you can close out a game with this card, whether or not you're playing the white side. It's a decent, probably mid-pack pickup in draft. Honored Crop Captain. I like this card a lot, actually. It's a 3/2 for 2. A lot of benefit there. It could even rumble in early for some early damage in an aggressive build. But what's really nice about this card is eventually, when you're ready to go in for a real big strike, you attack in with this, and maybe all those go-wide cards, those small creatures or tokens, are going to be able to get across extra damage. This also stacks. It's not legendary, so you can play a couple of these. It's uncommon and do a lot of damage maybe in the late game or get around a board stall. Very good card for the go-wide strategy. Prepare to Fight. The white portion of this card actually is very, very playable, even if I don't have green. Nice little combat trick. I don't mind running a copy of this. Also, it can mitigate an exert cost on a creature. The fight side, it's removal. Happy to run it in green. And if I play them both at the same time, as long as I have enough mana to do so, I could actually pump something of mine, use it towards the fight, get the lifelink off it too. A lot of value there. We're really happy to run this in limited in those colors, but it's still runnable if you just have white. On-Crop Champion. This is another card that is great with exert cards. It can simply mitigate a whole bunch of exert counters at once if you want to. It's also a 4/4 for 4, so there's a lot of value to be had just in those stats alone. Nice little beater, potentially a good stompy card to work with these effects that pump it and give it trample that we've been seeing, things of that nature. So really good limited card. This even could be first pickable, I think, in a lot of packs. Feels strong to me. In even worst case scenario, sometimes it's just like giving a bunch of creatures vigilance every once in a while. You're still getting the 4/4 attack out of it too. Spring 2 Minds. I really like the spring side if I'm looking to ramp and or fix my colors. And that's very playable regardless of the blue side. Mine's very good if I'm in Simic colors though too, and later in the game I just need some more heat. I'm running out of gas, I'm in a board stall. 6 casting cost, instant draw 2 actually sounds really good to me at that point. What I like about this card is the fact that, I mentioned this when it was spoiled, a lot of newer players will probably see the value in Spring before they see the value in Mind. And this card kind of teaches them how good an ability like Mind is. At first glance, it looks overcosted, but it actually could shift a game in your favor, especially if you're both running low on cards and resources towards the mid to late portion of the game. It can really make a difference. And I think this will help a lot of new players kind of learn how cards like Mind in the future could benefit their decks. Bounty of the Luxa. I actually like this card. And part of it kind of goes against my typical play style. I don't like playing an enchantment for 4 that isn't going to do anything for me until my next pre-combat main phase. And there are going to be times that you're not going to be able to put this card down because you're just fighting off a barrage of aggressive creatures or something like that. And that could get awkward. However, once you do get this card down, it's really good for you. It's an extra card draw every other turn. And the turn that you're not drawing the card, you're getting some mana ramp with 3 extra mana. So it lets you play these extra cards that you're drawing. That is really powerful. Now, I would say aggressive decks typically would want to skip this and play just more creatures. But Simic colors aren't really the hyper-aggressive colors most of the time. They're a little more methodical. And this card fits into that play style. I think this is actually a very good card. I think potentially this is first pickable in a lot of packs in draft. And in a sealed pool, I would probably include it more often than not, as long as I'm in those colors, of course. So I do think this actually turns out to be a good card, even though it does feel a little bit slow. I think it might be too slow for standard, though. I think that's a big compromise to take the turn off to play this, especially considering that there could be removal, like a disenchant style removal that could hit it. There's going to be a lot of anti-artifact cards out there in sideboards, at least initially, and many of those also hit enchantments, so that could hurt the playability of this a little bit. I think it's great in Commander, though. This is a phenomenal Commander card. It could be a lot of fun, just help you kind of boost a little bit in front of everybody else in the game. Really like this for that particular game type. Nissa, Steward of Elements. This is actually a very good Planeswalker. The only drawback for me is simply the 0 ability doesn't consistently protect her. It does some of the time, but not all the time. But here's what I like. She could potentially have a ton of loyalty. So in some ways, that's simply protecting her. She can take a little bit of damage and still survive and do okay. She has a +2 for Scry 2, which Scrying 2 is actually a very good ability, and +2 is actually real strong. And the fact of the matter is, I can play her on turn 3, put her down as 1 loyalty, Scry 2, she goes up to 3 already. That's pretty good if I have a way to protect her. Or if I don't, I just don't play her until later, and I put her down with something like 6 or 7 loyalty counters on her. Now, her ultimate's not super exciting. I mean, sometimes it could win you the game. Other times it's going to do absolutely nothing, or sometimes it'll be something in between. But that's fine, because basically you can simply play her and ultimate her. You don't want this to become a card that completely just like destroys your opponent on one ultimate, because that would be too powerful, right? So I think the ultimate is more than fair. I think the Scry 2 ability is great. I think the 0 casting cost ability that lets you ramp and potentially just start to put creatures out for free is really, really good. Fantastic card. This will definitely see standard play. First pickable in limited, obviously. And again, watch out for this in other formats like Commander too. It'll be great there. Weaver of Currents. Nice little ramp creature. It costs 3 for a 2/2, but I'm okay with that. If I'm in the market for ramp, even if it's colorless, then I'm going to be happy to play this card in limited. Alright, let's move on to some artifacts. And I do want to preference this by saying what I said just a few moments ago. There's going to be a lot of artifact hate in this set. It's going to nullify some of the effectiveness of these artifacts, especially in Game 2 or Game 3. So you do want to keep that in mind as you evaluate all of these cards, but it's not something I'll mention every time. Let's talk about the monuments first, since they are a cycle. Legendary artifacts, that is a little bit of a drawback for standard, I think, because some of these do feel like they could be standard playable, but the fact that they could get stuck in your hand makes them feel a little bit worse for me. I understand what they're trying to do. They don't want you stacking these and playing spells super cheap. But limited, I think these are all good limited plays. They all help the economy of your future spells for each particular color. And on top of that, they do something that that color kind of wants to do. The black one is allowing you to drain a life whenever you cast a creature spell. So again, kind of perfect for what the zombies are trying to do with that zombie aristocrat style game plan. Hezeretz is going to help you rummage. Get rid of those extra lands to get more heat and more pressure on your opponent. Kefnet's Monument keeps a creature tapped down an extra turn. It actually doesn't tap the creature though, so this may be the worst of the 5. Oketra's Monument is going to give you some small 1/1 white warriors with vigilance. Good if you want to go wide. Ronos is going to pump a creature +2/+2 and give it trample. Going to help you get by with those big creatures that don't have evasion. So they all completely make sense and limited. I think they're all good pickups. And you probably could get some of these like in the middle of the pack once people are starting to pick through those really strong like first pickable cards. I think this is maybe a middle pack pickup that could be really good and very playable for you in draft. Edifice of Authority, I think this card is actually very playable and limited. It's a tad slow. I mean, it costs 3, but if you have 4 mana, you can activate it on the turn you put it into play. And it can nullify a creature so it can't attack you. It can still block initially. Now, once you use this 3 times, and it has the brick counters on it, then from that point forward, it can't attack or block. You kind of pacify the creature till end of turn. So I like that a lot better, once you get to that point, of course. But I think it's very, very playable. I wouldn't mind running one of these. Embalmer's Tools. If you're all in on Embalm in a draft, this is a nice pickup for you. It's going to make that mechanic a little bit cheaper to use. You can tap zombies you control to mill yourself, and if you have enough Embalm cards, it's almost like drawing a card at that point. That's really nice. And in a pinch, you can also mill your opponent, and that could come into play at times if you have enough zombies in a limited game. So a lot of utility here. I really like this card quite a bit if I'm in that archetype. Gate to the Afterlife. Well, I hope God Pharaoh's Gift is going to be good in Hour of Devastation. That could make this card a lot better, but I don't think this card's bad on its own. I mean, it costs 3, but at that point, whenever a non-token creature dies, you get to loot. You also gain a life too, but more importantly, you get to loot. Looting is actually very powerful, and if you don't have a way to kind of move through your deck and select cards, this is a fine one, I think, for 3 mana. Again, not a first pick or anything like that, but maybe a middle-of-the-pack pickup that you could run as a utility card. In Standard, I would like to kind of test this in maybe one of those zombie aristocrat-style builds. I don't know if it would quite get there. It is a little dependent on board state, and also, I guess the big question is how many of the zombies that you'll be losing or sacrificing will be tokens versus non-tokens, and will the non-tokens be enough to really make that much of a difference? That's the real question. I'd at least want to test it, though. Honed Khopesh. I think this is really here for flavor reasons. I think they just wanted a Egyptian piece of equipment in the set, and I bet it looks amazing in foil with that blue sky and everything. As far as the playability goes, honestly, I don't see myself really running this almost ever. It's cheap, I'll give it that. It just costs 1 to equip, but it just doesn't really do that much. Luxa River Shrine. I'm not super high on this card. I mean, gaining 2 life every turn, which eventually you get to, is a little annoying, but it also doesn't win you the game. So I might side this in if I'm up against a hyper-aggressive deck where life gain might mean a little more for me to stabilize in the middle of the game. But other than that, I'm probably going to skip this one. Oracle's Vault. This is actually a good card. I think that the biggest drawback to this card is it exists in a set with a lot of artifact hate. And even though you might get away with one in Game 1, Game 2, and Game 3, this card's going to have a hard time really building momentum. It costs 4. If you have 6 mana, you could activate it the turn that it comes into play. That's kind of nice to expedite things. If you can get the brick counters on it, the card becomes even that much better. But even before you do, it's almost like having an extra card available to you every turn. After you do, it's getting a free play every turn. That's kind of cool too. Card's actually real good. It does a whole lot. It's just a shame that most of the time it's going to be destroyed very quickly, I think. At least Game 2 or Game 3. I wouldn't mind main decking this maybe, just trying to steal Game 1 with it, and then maybe even boarding it out, knowing that a lot of artifact hate's coming, and that could actually dilute your opponent's deck and let you steal Game 2. So, I don't know. I do like the card. I think it's still a high pick. There's a lot of upside to it. Also in Commander, I feel like this could be a lot of fun. There's a lot of big plays you could sneak out early with this card. Pyramid of the Pantheon. Now this starts off as color fixing at a loss basically, but if I'm really concerned about my colors, maybe I'm starting to get a little too greedy, it's still playable, at least it's cheap, and eventually becomes a Gilded Lotus, and that's actually really good if you get there and you have something to do with it. So in other words, it's good for some bigger plays or maybe some higher mid-range plays. So it is playable in some decks. It's just not going to work out in all limited builds. You just kind of have to know your deck for this one. I do think it's probably a little too slow for standard, a little too clunky. Commander, I mean, you have things like Gilded Lotus, but if you're looking for something unique and interesting to play alongside it, this could be fine. Throne of the God Pharaoh. This I really want to try out. I mean, it's only 2 to cast. It feels like it could be really good in certain decks. It's legendary. That's kind of a bummer. I'd like to stack this, but you know what? I just want to play this in a regular Magic game and just see how much incidental damage it does over time. Does it speed up the game by like a turn? And if I back it up with some burn or something, help me close out a game? I kind of want to try this out. I feel like this potentially could be really good. And if you exploit it with things like maybe using it to mitigate the exert cost of creatures a little bit by allowing it to do some extra damage, or maybe even having some creatures with tap abilities where you can tap them and do damage that way, you could maybe even unlock more potential. This is definitely one to watch. I don't know what the deck looks like in Standard, but I do think that, at least in Limited, this could be a good pickup. Watchers of the Dead. The ability is a little awkward because it does allow your opponents to choose which creatures to exile, so that's never good because a lot of the time this becomes just a dead ability. However, there are moments you could catch your opponent at an early point where there's only a couple of cards in their graveyard and at least one, maybe both of them do matter. They could be an Aftermath card and an Embalm card, for example. And that's kind of nice utility for this card. Aside from that, though, it's still a 2/2 for 2 and it's colorless, which is nice. It fits into any build. So if you're desperate for a 2-drop, this could be your best friend when you're trying to build out that curve. All right, let's move on to the lands. We're going to start off with the Allied Color Cycle lands. Now, hopefully we'll get the enemy colors in the not-too-distant future. It'd be nice if they were in the next set, but it'll probably be down the road a little bit. But having said that, these are really good cards. I mean, they are a little clunky. They come into play tapped, sure. But I think the upside of being able to cycle them away, especially later in the game when you just don't need lands anymore, is really high. So I think these are going to be strong. I love the original cycle lands. I think these are going to be fantastic. As far as Limited goes, if you're in the colors, they're very playable. They're going to help you fix, and just like I said, later in the game, if you don't need them anymore, cycle them away for more heat, keep the pressure on. As far as Standard goes, there's already a lot of folks thinking about brews consisting of cards like Splendid Reclamation or the Gitrog monster. So I think there's a lot of potential to exploit the cycling aspect of these a little bit. Even in Modern, some folks are thinking about Life from the Loam and things of that nature. So I guess we'll kind of wait and see how that pans out. But for the most part, I think these will definitely see Standard play, if nothing else. Really good inclusion here. I'm glad to see them kind of using the cycling ability on dual lands. Next we have Cascading Cataracts. To me this is a commander card, but it's a really good one. If I have a 3-color, 4-color, 5-color commander deck, I feel like this just becomes a staple in those decks from this point forward, right? I think the foil's going to look amazing. I would pick up my foils of this probably sooner than later. Next we have Cradle of the Accursed. This is the first desert land we're looking at today. I do want to point out, yesterday we did see the green creature that can be cycled away for green and 3 to allow you to search for a basic land or desert put into play untapped. So keep that in mind when we evaluate these. But for the most part, I want to say this about the deserts in general, and this includes this one. They are not super powerful. Many of them, like this one, can only be activated at sorcery speed. They are attached to lands, but they are only tapping for colorless mana. So here's the deal with these. A lot of times you have to evaluate these cards. This one, for example, as, would you play a card that says, pay 3 to cast, it can't be countered, you get a 2/2 black zombie creature token, it's a sorcery. Would you play that card? Probably most of the time, no, right? Now, some people would say, well, you know what, I want to play that card, but I'm not playing that card. I'm playing a land that's giving me an upside. So I'm going to be playing lands anyway. I need to cast my other cards, so what's wrong with playing this land? Nothing if you have the mana base to support this. Now think of it this way. If you're in Orzhov colors, for example, and you're going to go 9 swamps and 8 plains, and instead you go 8 and 8 and you play this, that's fine. Then you're playing this card. It's an extra kind of bonus upside. Maybe at some point you make a 2/2 zombie. That zombie might just matter with some of the other Orzhov cards you have. Wonderful. But if you're not in a deck that's basically split down the middle like that, if you're in a deck that's heavier one color than another, or you're splashing a third color or something like that, then this is going to hurt your mana consistency by playing this just because it has the spell tacked onto it as opposed to playing even another basic land. And that's going to hurt you if you're not careful. Secondly, if I do really still want this spell and I'm in a deck that can't support it mana-wise, then you should count it as a spell and not a land in your deck at that point. And let's face it, there's very few spells that are going to be beat out by something like this, right? So it kind of is what it is. I don't think I have too much more to say about it. Like I said, it's playable, but in a very specific scenario, I think. Evolving Wilds, you're probably familiar with this card. It's been reprinted many, many times, but it's a great way to help you fix your color. Be careful of Aven Mind Sensor, though. Grasping Dunes is another desert. This time you can put a -1/-1 counter on a creature. All you have to do is pay 1, sacrifice it, but you can only do it at any time you can play sorcery. So again, it's really locking you into a very specific scenario. Again, if your mana base can support it, it might be fine to run one of these, but that's really a very specific scenario. Painted Bluffs, another land that's there to help you fix colors. If you need it, you'll be happy to see it. It's at common. Sun-Scorched Desert pings a player when it enters the battlefield. Now, I find it interesting that they said it deals 1 damage to target player, so you could hit yourself with this. I almost feel like this card is maybe a precursor to a future mechanic that could be coming maybe in the next block. Like maybe some sort of like anti-bloodthirst. Like if you took damage this turn, you play a creature and it gets some sort of bonus or something like that. A reverse bloodthirst, if you will. I don't know. Or maybe just bloodthirst will come back. I guess we'll wait and see. But I feel like this card's hinting at something. It just seems so unusual and doesn't really fit anywhere. So maybe they're alluding to something that's coming in the future with this one. Having said that, those are the cards for today. We made it. We got through the whole set. So just a quick programming note for the next few days. Tomorrow I'm going to do the pre-release primer. And if you've watched those in the past, they're really geared more for new players. So more established players, I don't know if you'll get a whole lot out of them. But the whole idea is to talk about maybe if you've never been to a pre-release before, what to expect, how to prepare, that type of thing. I'm also going to talk about the invocations in that video as well. Then on Friday, I'm going to do a Amonkhet market watch. So that way, Friday night or Saturday or Sunday, if you're in a pre-release, you kind of know what the value roughly of some of the key cards that you could be opening are. Nobody tricks you into a bad trade on the pre-release weekend. And then finally on Saturday, we're going to do a regular market watch like we typically do, but we skipped last week because of the set review. So until next time, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.